Bloody Sunday is one of those infamous historical events that most people have never heard of. It's a phrase used to describe two separate and distinct occasions when there was large-scale killing of civilians by government forces. One was in Russia in 1905, the other in Russia again in 1917. This first one, Bloody Sunday in 1905, is the one we'll be focusing on today. Bloody Sunday happened during the Russo-Japanese War, which was fought between the Russian Empire and the Empire of Japan over control of territories in East Asia and the Pacific. As the war progressed, it became increasingly clear that the Russian army wasn't quite up to scratch. There were severe shortages of food, of weapons, of basic supplies. Morale was low and the Tsar was getting increasingly desperate. In October of 1904, the Russians had suffered a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Port Arthur. And so, in an effort to boost morale at home, the government decided to hold a massive victory parade in St. Petersburg. All the troops that had been involved in the battle were brought back to parade in front of the Tsar and the public. But while the government saw this as a chance to show off the strength of their army, to the public, it appeared as though the government was doing the exact opposite. They were parading their failures. And as such, many people felt intense shame and anger towards the government. Adding fuel to the fire at this same time, there was a huge disparity between the rich and the poor. The wealthy aristocrats lived lives of luxury, while the working class lived in extreme poverty. The workers in St. Petersburg had long been discontent with the way they were being treated, and they were looking for someone to blame. And so when the humiliating defeat in the war became public knowledge, they blamed the Tsar. They protested, they rioted, and then came Bloody Sunday. On the morning of January, tens of thousands of protesters marched peacefully through the streets of St. Petersburg to the Winter Palace where the Tsar's residence was located. They wanted to deliver a petition to the Tsar asking for better working conditions and for an end to the war. There were priests and monks marching alongside the crowds, singing religious songs. There were intellectuals and students, even some soldiers. Many of them carried icons and crosses. When the Tsar received word that these protesters were marching on his palace, he wasn't concerned. He thought it would all be over very quickly. So he spent the morning having an extramarital affair. When the crowd arrived at the palace gates, they were met by a detachment of the Tsar's personal guard. At first, the soldiers stood by and watched as the crowds grew larger and larger. But then the priests and monks began to get agitated. They started cursing the soldiers, calling them cowards and murderers. And then someone threw a snowball. Stones were exchanged between the protesters and the soldiers. Then a shot was fired. We don't know who fired it, but what we do know is that after that first gunshot, there was pandemonium. People fell down dead or wounded, clutching their chests and staring blankly ahead of them. The remaining protesters panicked and fled. The soldiers gave chase, firing their rifles into the crowds. It's believed that between 100 and 300 protesters were killed that day. The Tsar's guards had opened fire on peaceful protesters. Now, why is this day known as Bloody Sunday? Well, because the blood of the protesters seeped into the snow, turning it a deep red color. After Bloody Sunday, the Tsar had protesters arrested and exiled. He tried to keep a lid on things, but news of the massacre spread like wildfire. People took to the streets again, this time in much larger numbers. The Tsar responded with more violence. Soon, Russia was engulfed in what became known as the 1905 Revolution. Strikes, riots, and protests continued throughout the country. The Tsar was forced to flee to safety in St. Petersburg. Eventually, after hundreds more had been killed, the unrest began to die down. The Tsar returned from exile, and Bloody Sunday became nothing more than a footnote in history. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you want to watch more of my videos, you can do so here.